Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's session, Net Zero from Store to Door, Strategies for Decarbonizing the Retail Supply Chain and Operations. This panel will explore the essential role of electric vehicles working towards achieving net zero emissions in the retail sector's supply chain and in operations, highlighting the shift towards a more sustainable logistics through commercial electric vehicles. Speakers today include Leigh Pearson, Senior Director of Facilities, Sustainability, Sourcing, and Procurement from Staples Canada. That's a long list. And Shayna, Rector Bleeker, VP and co-founder of 7Gen. I'm Michael Zabaneh. I'm Vice President Sustainability at Retail Council of Canada. If you don't know us, we are an industry association representing over 1,000 retailers and quick service restaurants across the country. The heart of what we do is government advocacy, but increasingly helping our members navigate the complex space of decarbonization and climate mitigation, especially through electric vehicles and energy efficiency in operations. So I'm going to hand over to our panelists to maybe start by providing an overview of your companies and share the role you play in driving decarbonization and the transition towards EVs.
Sure. So again, my name is Leigh Pearson. I look after facilities, sustainability, sourcing, and procurement. And I've been with Staples for 27 years. So, I've been able to be on this journey from the beginning, which is really lovely. And I would say in terms of the role that a team like mine would play in this is we're really here to help bring it to life. By no means are we the experts in transportation. We have individuals who are highly proficient in that area. We're simply here to help facilitate that. And really, how do we connect it to the bigger sustainability objectives of the organization? So how do we weave it into how we show up, not only in terms of how we deliver, but how we show up in our communities and how we show up for our associates.
Amazing. Shayna.
Yeah, sure. So good afternoon, everyone. Shayna, co-founder and VP of Strategic Partnerships for a little Canadian company called 7Gen. We grew up at the beginning of the pandemic around this thesis, okay, green or clean vehicles and technology exist. There's a few, let's keep it simple, few barriers to why they're not getting deployed. So our thesis was, if we were able to mobilize the money, so finance the vehicles and the chargers and have clients pay us back with money they're currently spending on gas and maintenance for vehicles, then that first barrier, I don't have budget, would be addressed. Now the second part, as we're all learning, for those that have been here at the Electric Autonomy Expo for 2 days, there's a lot of complexity in deploying an electric vehicle. This is not as simple as buy a vehicle and get a gas card and off and on your way. And we don't want people to get tripped up over that. So I try to simplify it in saying, we mobilize the money and the know-how. Okay, we're an EV fleet management company, effectively. And what that means is as Leigh said, she's got a huge job there. She's got a lot of accountabilities and responsibilities, and she'll provide the air cover and get the team pointed in a direction of, we want to be serious about doing something. And then a group like us works with fleets to, find the technology, do the infrastructure design plan, actually get it commissioned, and then continue to maintain and operate it. That's what we do.
So there's a lot of efforts happening right now, especially with corporates. There's a lot of global objectives towards net zero, reducing the impact of climate change to 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2050. Where do things fit in the retail sector, and where does, within that, in terms of decarbonizing, where does electric vehicle uptake of commercial fleets fit in?
Well, I think retail plays a pretty significant role. I mean, we literally are in each and every community. We're in your workplace, we're in your home. So we have the ability to, I would say, inspire change, unlock change, and really through not only the products that we offer, whatever the service or product you might offer, but through other ways in which we do that as an organization. How do we show up? How do we live our values? I think we, again, have this opportunity to create momentum and to create change and really be a catalyst to that. I would say EV plays a part it's certainly not necessarily the whole piece for us. I would say, and I'll say it time and time again, it has to fit with your organization. It has to fit with who you are and what you value and what matters. Why do you exist as an organization? And so I think the size of EV in that portfolio for each organization will look different. But I would say as retailers in particular, we have an obligation. We all have a lot of associates that count on us. That's how they make their livelihood. We have an obligation to be responsible and to collaborate and to create solutions for, again, Canadians.
And a huge part of what retailers are working towards is engaging the supply chain to decarbonize, to drive a circular economy. 90% of greenhouse gas emissions typically within a retail environment comes from supply chain. So Shayna, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, what I really liked in what Leigh said was, there's two things. There's organizational, societal, but there's also you. So for a really long time, in the beginning of my career, I see some early career folks here in the audience as well. I thought, well, I want to use the resource of me to have a positive impact in the world. That was very important to me. So at the time, I thought, okay, that means either you work in government, you set the rules of the game. You work in finance, you figure out how to fund big change projects, infrastructure, like somebody's got to back that. Or you work in energy, because energy is what warms, cools us, moves goods to and from markets. I thought those were the three big levers. And I spent 10 years working from Shell, one of the energy majors. And I always say from, because I was trying to drive change from a large systems player. And this is where I segue to the role of retail. We can operate this 50,000 feet, these, carbon emissions goals. I don't know what a ton of carbon looks like. How about you? I do know what buying this jacket looked like. I know what receiving a delivery of my kids' school supplies looks like, feels like, smells like, feels like. So I really think that's the inspiration point for the role of retail. It's not the big systems actors we all need to wait on. Every single one of us in literally every job we do has an opportunity. And the reason why I find retail in the supply chain part of getting goods to market so interesting is I have a stat for you. In this country, 30% of Canadians live within 250 meters of a major thoroughfare or road. The majority of traffic on those are vehicles that are taking people and things places. That's a huge amount of emissions, and it contributes to a huge amount of premature deaths and health impacts. So yeah, if you want to work in a sector that has an opportunity for impact, I think decarbonizing how you get your goods to market is an awesome place to start.
It is, and from my perspective, I think you hit on a really important point about driving transformational change, because whether it is EVs or decarbonizing facilities or reducing plastic waste, everybody across supply chains has to be part of that, whether it's the retailer, industry, government needs to play a role, and of course the consumer. What role does the consumer play in, especially from your perspective, in terms of driving consumer experience while also working to meet your environmental objectives?
Well, the customer is why we exist. So I would say they're really at the heart of everything that we're doing. And so it has to make sense. We have to make it easy, whether that's through education on assortment and trying to drive change around behaviors around what goods we buy and changing supply and demand for more responsible products to drive price parity in the product as an example. But also making it easy to make a difference from a recycling perspective, from an energy efficiency perspective. So, we have a huge opportunity through what we're doing to influence change within the customer base, which again, it just creates sort of that flywheel within our communities, but also that's why it's important we show up the right way. We need them to choose us in our case by providing those solutions. And again, we're the working and learning company. And so education is paramount to what we're doing. We have this wonderful ability at Staples to show up and to create this holistic ecosystem within both retail and online to educate from what the product is, to how we service it, to how we warranty it, to how we recycle it at the end of its useful life. So I think, again, I can't say enough about the customer. We wouldn't be here without them.
So just to continue with that, you have like a huge, diverse product range. You have special delivery requirements. How are you prioritizing your sustainability targets? How are you setting them, and then filtering down to, incorporating potentially more electric vehicles? And how are you navigating this in terms of starting and scaling?
Carefully.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just, I'm pretty transparent. You'll just find that. So, again, we don't exist without the customer. The customer experience is paramount. Our teams are exceptional at how they deliver goods to our customers. We're known for customer service. So we cannot at any point ever forget that. We can't ever take our eye off that prize and say, you know what, while we're experimenting, while we're figuring things out, if we're scaling, there's no time for us at any point to lose the customer through that process. And so that means, again, and sometimes I'm going to go a little off and talk more about whether it's recycling or what have you, but everything we've ever done at Staples around sustainability has always been, we've thought about how does it relate to who we are, who our customer is. We start small. We figure out how to do it well without adding a lot of complexity to both our customer or our associates, and then we figure out how to scale it. And so we've been doing this for over 20 plus years, again, largely in recycling and energy efficiency. And so this was the time. This was the time to say, what's next for us? And let's look at electrification. And we've done that, but again, we're being cautious. It doesn't mean we're not willing to take a chance, but we want it to be calculated. We want it to make sense, and we want to be measuring along the way, and again, making sure that it's not only adding value, but that it's not detracting from experience at the same time.
Michael, if I could just maybe add on that and complement something that Leigh hasn't called out, and I think it could be relevant for the audience. So in a lot of organizations, sustainability is its own function somewhere over here. And the primary role of what they do is they spend a long time going, what's our data? What's our footprint? What's where? And when they have some confidence about that, then they, to your point, they start going, okay, here's the targets we can shoot for. Then they need to engage and find other department heads and colleagues to actually move the needle on any of that data. What's really great about Staples and Staples Canada and Leigh, your position, is you're able to take steps practically and carefully because you are sustainability, you oversee procurement, you oversee supply chain and facilities. So the reason, and I must give you a compliment, like it's great that you're starting. A lot of other folks are still having the internal baseball a little bit of, well, facilities is busy doing 5 other things, so this isn't a priority for them. And I just want to say, this isn't as easy as we might hope it to be, so you do need to proceed carefully, and you need to start learning.
Yeah, and I think I know now I'm not on the script at all, but what I would say, though, is that is what's important. If you're out there trying to build a sustainability function, what is important is thinking about collaboration. And so I guess part of the benefit of 27 years is you get to somewhat build it as you go. And so starting the facilities function and being able to expand upon that, it's been great because the biggest piece is this is a baton that we're passing between each other. And so when you can do it together, the ability for it to have like sticking power and be long lasting, there's just a real opportunity when you're all connected. So I would say just if anyone's out there looking at opportunity, I would say really connecting those functions together is incredibly powerful.
I think, Shayna, you made an interesting point about, yes, we're in the data. A lot of sustainability people are because there's so many reporting requirements. I've heard from some of our largest members that up to 80% of their time ends up on data and reporting as opposed to actually doing something. But I think this point about resourcing sustainability is really important. So what does that look like at Staples? You don't necessarily need to tell us who's responsible for what, but how are things generally structured and managed, and how are you engaging externally as well?
Sure. So again, I'll call it a little grassroots, really, in terms of how we've built it on a couple of fronts. Number one, the function that I'm really fortunate to lead is very grassroots, built it as we've gone over 27 years. So facilities started as one person, myself, And now I'm really fortunate that over time we've been able to really grow that, although still two in sustainability. I'll just put that out there. Two, myself and one other individual for Staples. But I would say that grassroots nature, that's also how we started recycling, some grassroots initiatives in our stores. If you think about our journey to EV, our transportation team looking at it and saying, hey, how can we show up differently? And again, for me, that's how I know it's embedded in who we are. That's how I know it's part of the culture of our organization, because we see it happening in pockets. And then what we figure out how to do is, how do you wrap your arms around that? And the thing about facilities, if anyone's been in facilities management, I often say we have tentacles that sort of go throughout the organization, often under the surface. And so when you're able to combine that with sustainability, it means that we're able to see how things are connected throughout the organization and say, you know what, that works really well in retail. You know what, that might work in supply chain, or vice versa. And so I would say it's structured, not necessarily always formally that way. It's about relationships. It's about trust. And I think we've had the ability over 2 decades to build trust with other parts of our organization, and so that individuals and groups are coming to us with these ideas, and we're saying, okay, how do we take that from here to there? How do we scale that? How do we measure it? How do we tell the story? Because there's absolutely a part of which you have to tell it. You have to tell it to help it grow, like to nurture it. So I would say that's a little bit about Staples. It's really woven into who we are, and I think if it's not, and if you don't feel it, and if it's not authentic, it's going to be very hard to get that momentum. So I'm just, again, I can't really say enough about how fortunate I am to lead this function.
So, this is clearly a new space for a lot of retailers. I'd love to know, what was your first conversation like with 7Gen?
Yeah, so to be honest, I wasn't in the first conversation necessarily. This is where I talk about grassroots. This is where I talk about there's passionate people. There's people who want to think about how to do things differently throughout the organization. And so it was really, I have to give all the credit to transportation. That's who kicked off this conversation. I would also say thank you to transportation for adding me to it, as we move through it, to think about how we can partner together to really think about not just the function of how the vehicle operates, and or from a facilities perspective, how we build the charging infrastructure, but again, what that means in terms of the customer experience and how we show up in our communities, and how we're looking at our overall footprint as an organization.
Shayna, do you have anything to add on that first conversation with Staples?
Yeah, maybe to extrapolate it out, it was one that we have with some other fleets as well, I think, and it's a lot of what brings people to attend an event like this. The first decision point is, what vehicle does our job? So what vehicle has the range to deliver our things? And a lot of time is spent on that. And then, as you said, there's a lot of other parts of charging and infrastructure, et cetera. So that first conversation was, they'd had a first couple of vehicles, and it just was taking more of the team's time than they might expect. And transportation's got a lot of other things to do as well. And we hear that time and time again. A fleet will start on their own, or they will have got a couple of vehicles. Some even are relying on public charging to start. And then there comes a point in time when you need to go, okay, what's our next step? What can we do in our current facilities with the existing load capacity that exists? And they may or may not have people in the team that understand electrical engineering and understand half of the terms that need to be considered in then procuring chargers. So we say, you do what you do really well. We're not a retailer, but we are an installer and a maintainer of charging. We do what we do well.
So typically in your first conversations with businesses, there's obviously a lot of barriers, cost, infrastructure. How do you navigate that with some of your partners?
Yeah, again, the first conversation is there technology that does what you need? Second conversation is, what can we start in the short term? And so the question is, what is the electrical capacity of the facilities that they operate out of? And from there, you can get a simple starting roadmap, but you've got to soon start planning for, okay, how are we planning for energy management, particularly in a place like Ontario? You have lots of different utilities, lots of different power rates. There's a lot of other considerations. Some clients want to engage in that conversation and learn. That's one thing we love about Staples. They are truly a learning organization, right? Others say, I don't have the bandwidth for this. I'm busy hiring, firing, booking loads. I need someone to take care of this for me because a customer is asking us to do this. So that's the example here. Some people have read in the news with IKEA, another retailer. IKEA has none of their own vehicles. They make beautiful things at affordable prices for us to put in our homes. That's what they focus on. They send their goods to market through third-party logistics providers. So while they have the sustainability goal of being a good corporate citizen and we want to have 100% of our goods going to market on zero-emission vehicles, they have limited access to the levers. So different than a retailer like Staples, the first conversation there is actually not with facilities or transportation, it's with their procurement team. Who is buying the movement of your goods, and what's the conversation we can facilitate? So in that instance, it was, 7Gen, could you speak with our third-party logistics providers and see if you can help them get into a zero-emission vehicle? So it's a little bit different, case by case, market by market, but it's kind of the same thing. Vehicle that does the job, what's the technology we can do today, and how do we plan for tomorrow?
So electric vehicles within the commercial space have been scaling for some time now. I think things seem a little bit slower than we'd like to see it. We know that there's very ambitious targets in Canada coming up, I believe, in 2040. How can we make things move faster?
I mean, our federal government and some provincial governments, shout out to BC and Quebec, have been very good at setting the table with a number of incentives, or as you like to say, maybe carrots for how to get started. So for example, at the federal level, there are vehicle incentives that range as low as $10,000 per vehicle, as high as $150,000 per vehicle that the government is contributing towards seeing early adopters get these vehicles on the road. So huge help. Won't be around forever. And that's where a role for business models like ours exists. So we have Loblaws, Purelator, a few really big fleets attending this expo. They have very big stretch goals. They're very healthy businesses with great balance sheets, and they have executives that have said, we are committing X billion to this transition. They represent 10% of the fleets in this country. The rest are really small to medium-sized enterprises. So for them, while the incentives are interesting, the time to find out about them, the process to apply for them, the process to report against them, to obtain that money is quite burdensome. Secondarily, they're doing fiscal planning based on past year's performance. So they're planning to replace their vehicles with a ICE vehicle budget, and there is nothing in that plan for infrastructure. So more business models like ours, where somebody says, it might be even the utility in some instances says, we are willing to contribute towards the costs of this transition because, insert your reason here. So the bankers we work with say, we want to deploy capital in ESG-aligned projects. Great. Thank you, Van City, for being one of first of our loan partners. Utilities are starting to say, well, we've always said we'll pay for the planning work or the cost to get power to your site. Some of the conversations happening at events like this are, could or should the utility actually contribute for the cost of the battery in your vehicles? Why? Those vehicles are or can act effectively as a local energy storage. So when they're not out driving, doing what they need to do on behalf of a retailer or fleet, they're sitting back at the depot overnight at a point in the day when the utility is saying we're having a spike in demand and we aren't able to build the distribution to meet that. So if they're going to be coming to retailers saying, hey, could we tap into some of the power sitting in your battery? Well, is that an innovative model where actually they should be paying for that battery? And that helps bring down the cost of the vehicle. So stuff like this, I think, is going to help.
Interesting. Where is supply? Because I had heard, at least last year that there were challenges in getting the supply of the vehicles. Where do things sit now?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, supply of anything, 2020 to 2022 was tough. And electric vehicle supply has been challenging because it's the classic clean tech change curve, right? You build the technology, you test the technology, it's available, but not at scale until someone gets sufficient purchase orders that they're able to build production facilities to produce. So that's what's been happening in the system the last few years. Many electric vehicle manufacturers, both the traditional OEMs like GM with a Bright Drop, or Volvo was on stage earlier today, and startup OEMs have been building capacity. So the vehicle availability is much less the issue now, Michael. It is the components we need in the charging infrastructure side, switchgear, transformers. So it's not all worked out, but it's getting better.
Going back to infrastructure at the facility level and some of the upgrades that you had to consider and engagement with, do we have enough load to handle this new vehicle? What did that look like? What are some of the upgrades you had to undertake?
Yeah, so I think just to back it up a little bit too, and just speaking about removing complexity. And the reality is often in retail, resources are limited, whether that be human or financial. And so again, a space like this, which is relatively new and emerging, and at times early days, I'll use the word a little volatile. I think it's important to be curious and do things like this. Like if I were to answer that first question, I would say it's about leaning in and being vulnerable and saying, I really don't know. We don't know. We don't know what we don't know. We have a lot to learn, and sharing what's happening amongst each other. Like there are parts of this that are, I would say, pre-competitive, where we can have conversations about how do we build it better together versus all of us suffering in silence, so to speak, because if we want it to work, we have to be part of helping to remove the obstacles to do that, and some of that is just through sharing. I would say, again, even from an infrastructure perspective, we're still early days into understanding what do we need from an infrastructure perspective, and also how does other things we're doing from an energy efficiency perspective play into that strategy. So as we're converting buildings to LED or looking at building automation, reducing load, how does reducing load help free capacity for EV infrastructure? Right, so that's a piece of it that you have to look at. But again, it's not necessarily, when I think about traditional facilities, someone says, here's the scope of work. To us, we simply cut a work order to our electrical contractor and we go. This is not that. That's not what this is. This is really about understanding the longer term play, but also understanding holistically what your building needs to operate, not only today, but how you're going to power it and what connects to it for the future. So I would say definitely finding strong partnerships and when it comes to infrastructure, and understanding your building. So our maintenance teams are heavily involved as well. And then thinking about logistically where you place the charger, because ultimately, sometimes optimal for a facilities person to say this is where that charger should go is not at all optimal for the teams that have to load those vehicles. So you have to really think about how all the pieces come together. And I don't profess to have the answers on that necessarily. I will profess to say we're committed to figuring it out.
So as companies try to figure it out, Shayna, imagine a company with 100 vehicles, all ICE vehicles. What are some of the recommendations that you would make? Where do they start? What are some of the key considerations they need to think about in transitioning?
The sentence used at the keynote yesterday, the closing words, was one of don't get lost in all the benefits and the challenges and da-da. Focus on removing the friction. So Staples has been very good at that. Like they tried starting on their own. They started learning what they didn't know, found a partner in the case of us, and it's been a let's try what we can try. And as they canter up the learning curve, okay, plan for the future. But no, a fleet of 100 vehicles, in some parts of the region, utilities are being very supportive. They want to know. They want to know what fleets are thinking about this. If they need to plan forward on demand, they're saying, we will pay for you to do a fleet analysis. So they're funding for you to work with a consultant, the likes of us, there's many that can do it, that does a map of using your vehicle telematics, what is happening today, where are vehicles going, And where is electric vehicle technology? What can be replaced? Number two, what can your facilities handle? And then you can start going, all right, this is the easy part. We don't need to go to a utility to add a charger on our existing circuit breaker and deploy 3 cargo vans. This is not too bad. When we start getting into larger Class 8 vehicles, yes, there's a big amount of load on those, and more planning is required. And I think half the sessions here have said, engage your utility and engage your utility early. Yeah, but again, remove the fiction, start where you can, understand who your champions are. And they're not always in the most obvious places. You think it's going to be someone in transportation, and actually, it's your drivers. Like Chris Henry from Purelator said it on a panel this morning. He said, listen, the exec told us we had to do it. I'm the procurement guy. I'll figure out how to buy it. And he goes, and then somewhere between me and the drivers, there's some resistance because there's change and somebody doesn't like where the charger was placed. It gets messy. He says, but the biggest champions were then his drivers. Now that they've driven an EV, he's like, I can't get them to drive the combustion engine vehicle. So yeah, finding the champions, and you don't always know where they're going to come from.
So what are some of the emerging trends that you see out there in terms of new technologies that could help accelerate the transition to more electric vehicles, Shayna?
A lot of new vehicles with more range have come out this year. So range anxiety has been a thing. Most vehicles working 8 hours in a day might be doing 100 kilometers a day. Well, if the range on the battery is 120 or 130, it's not a large margin for error on a cold day or in traffic. But a lot of new technology has come out this year, and I think that is the cost of batteries are coming down. That's improving all the time. The one I'm excited about, and I'm really excited that 7Gen's involved in the testing for it, is the potential of what they call vehicle to X. So like I was alluding to later, these vehicles, when they're not driving, can be and are an energy store. And I mean, you're seeing it yourselves. You're not coming back to depot with only 10% battery left. Like many of our clients are coming back, and they've only used 30% of the battery capacity. So a little bit of top up of a charger, and then the ability for that to become part of a local microgrid situation is really exciting. And the research that just came out of the UK recently was, if you plot the economic growth of the UK and what the demands that will be on just heating and cooling, plus if you electrify all of their transportation, something like 5 extra megawatts of power would be required by 2040. If you add what they call energy management, so that's just, you don't need to just plug the thing in and it charges right away. Like if you don't need the vehicle till tomorrow, it could charge at midnight when there's less people that need power. That energy management software brings down the curve of how much power you'll need. Add into it vehicle to X and electrifying a good portion of transportation. They will need less power in 2040 than the electrical utilities are distributing today. We don't have all the agreements figured out. The utilities don't know how the power purchase agreements will work, but I'm super excited that we have a brave client that says, use my vehicles, let's figure this out.
Very cool. So Leigh, for companies beginning to explore the transition to electric vehicles for their logistics, what are some of the initial steps based on your experience would you recommend to them?
I would say to get out there and ask a lot of questions in terms of what's going on in the market, what's going on with the technology. So, I would look outward for sure, but I would also take a pretty hard look inside and understand what is it as an organization you are trying to solve? And how do you drive value? Again, the journey of sustainability is going to look drastically different for every organization. We have a different customer, we have different sets of perhaps values or key categories or what have you. So you have to understand first and foremost, what is your why? Why are you doing this? And what pieces of it can you impact the most? So again, for us, EV could be part of that solution. Is it the whole solution? We have to find out. We have to learn. We have to understand, and we have to take the time to, again, when you think about removing friction, part of that is being very candid in our feedback with each other, with our partners. Again, there's going to be missteps along the way, but we have to be able to have really, really honest conversations about, again, what is it we are trying to solution here, and how are we going to do that? So I would say, thinking about the big picture plan, thinking about the timeline of that plan, how do you work it back from there, factoring in there will be challenges along the way, there will be obstacles you have to overcome. But I think so much can be said about clarity and really having that North Star of where do you want to go and how do you work backwards from that. I think it's harder when you're trying to just bolt on to something because maybe it's what you think is the right thing to do or what others are doing. Doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do. It just might not be the right thing at the right time for your organization, and that's okay. So those are the things that I would say from my perspective anyway.
Thanks. Shayna, what are your thoughts?
Ditto, and add patience. I've heard the sentence here, fail forward. I don't love the word fail. It is learn forward. So the North Star, I agree. And just understanding even people that have worked in this space. I mean, there's some fabulous engineers out here that have been working on designing microgrids and charging infrastructure for many, many years. The best of them will even say, we don't have it all figured out. So be patient, be in it for the long term, and be candid and learn along the way. All right, now we're going to shift that way.
Start and scale.
Yes.
Start and scale. And that's what kind of we need as we transition into any major shift, is that you can't just jump into it. And you guys talked about some of the key things about like understanding where you sit internally, doing the feasibility, talking to different stakeholders internally, different suppliers, peers in industry to kind of share knowledge. Very important. Try it, go into it, understand where the challenges are, be candid with each other, and go for it and scale. So good luck. Thanks a lot. We do have a few minutes for any questions from the audience. There's a microphone at the back. All right.
Hi, my name's Marco Ovid. I'm a reporter with the Toronto Star, and I write a little bit from time to time about EVs, though I must admit I'm a pretty big amateur. But my ears perked up, Shayna, when I heard you talk about basically reducing future electricity demand with vehicles. And I was hoping maybe, if we have a few minutes, you could dive a little bit more into detail about how that works.
So in terms of the how it works, at the moment, V1 or early version chargers are just intended for electrons to go one way, right? So out to the vehicle. There's also these bi-directional chargers. So yes, they'll take power from a building and put it into a vehicle, but they also have the ability to receive it back. That hasn't been deployed at scale. This is, as one of the engineers from SEMA said yesterday, it's not that hard. Like, technically, a lot is possible. The issue is the will, right? So we've got, frankly, we've got a 100-year-old power system. We also have a 100-year-old transportation system, and we're asking them to do overnight. So we're all kind of on the monodirectional charging level problem solving, right? How do I just get more power from the grid into my facility to do my things? And how do I manage my scope 1, 2? Like, what can I do in my sphere of control? The world we're stepping into is this world of more decentralized systems, not only in electrification. This is the circular economy you'll hear talked about in other circles. It is requiring collaboration and working together, frankly, in ways we used to do in maybe a hunter-gatherer moment that we've abstracted away from in the beautiful 20th century that has seen so much scale, right? So we can go into more detail on the technicality. There was a whole wonderful panel on it earlier today. It's tough. This threatens the way a lot of stuff works right now. So people have to be open to trying stuff, learning, doing these pilot projects where we're doing modeling about giving a $150,000 bus to a utility to test V2X on, like that is a risk. So how do we manage that risk? Well, I got to figure out the financing of that. I got to go to the bank to tell them what. So there's so much more to it, but I think it's great to stay at that high level, right? Our BHAG here is clean, healthy air, right? Back to that stat I shared, right? Cause of death of a little girl in England 3 years ago now was poor air quality. Like this is a real thing. So stay focused on the big bit and then work through the details. But yeah, the potential of V2X is wonderfully exciting. And you know, I want to just cast our minds back. 1910, if anybody remembers, there's a photo of Manhattan. And it's a picture of, I think it's Fifth Avenue or something. Sorry, don't quote me on the street. But it's a picture where you only see a couple of Model T4s, and you mostly see horse and buggy up and down the street. Exactly the same street 10 years later is all Model T4s with a couple of horse and buggies. One day we're not going to talk about this infrastructure piece. It's just going to be how it works. Microgrids, we won't think about them. They will be everywhere. And the sharing of electrons will happen back and forth. How we trade those electrons and who is paid what will be figured out. We just don't know it all today.
Any other questions? Great question, by the way. I think we can wrap up. Thanks so much, Leigh and Shayna, and thank you for joining us today. And look forward to seeing you all next year.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.